A lot has happened in post-secondary education this year. BC is now home to 10 universities. The provincial government has shifted budget priorities and money to trades and technical schools. Enrollment in higher education continues to be an issue, and increased competition for students has administrators reconsidering entrance requirements. What do all these changes in post-secondary education mean for students graduating from high school? How will the shifting landscape affect the cost of and admission to higher education? What are some considerations parents and high school students need to make when contemplating education decisions? I'm Paul Shaker, and this is an Education Matter. Joining me on the program today from SFU are Michelle Nilsson, Assistant Professor of Higher Education, and the university's Registrar, Kate Ross. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
We have a lot more universities in BC than we did at the beginning of the year, and something we'd like to reflect on here is what this means for parents and students in British Columbia. Does it mean more choice? Is there a trade-off? Are there some negatives to this as well as positives? I'm sure you've both thought about this, so Michelle, do you have some comment on the growth in our universities here?
Well, I think students have always had these choices that we currently have in BC, but what it does is it illustrates, or it gives students the illusion of having more choice, which I think is important when it comes time for students to choose a post-secondary education institution.
Kate, what are some of your thoughts on the proliferation of BC universities?
Well, I think that what it does, I agree with Michelle, that it gives different choices, and I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we'll have, is to actually help students to differentiate between the different universities, because there's a group that will be more predominantly teaching universities, and then there will be research-intensive universities, and to help the public actually understand the difference between those.
You spent part of your career at Camosun College on the island, so you have experience in different sorts of institutions. Would you tell us a little more from a parent's point of view to help their student pick a university or a college? How do the different forms of institutions vary from the student's point of view?
I think that the most important thing, if I was advising a parent or a young person about attending post-secondary education, is to actually first of all, pick a program that is a really good fit for you, and then look at the different institutions that program's offered at. And for different students, there are different fits, and that's really, really critical in a student making a decision around choice. And that for some students, they need the confidence that can come from being in a smaller institution. And for some students, they want to jump into that kind of large institutional experience and take in everything that it has to offer. So I think it's about choice around who you are and what's a good fit for you, so that you become confident and able and are successful at post-secondary.
Do you have some themes that you'd like to pick up on with respect to this question, Michelle?
Definitely. One of the things, just kind of building on what Kate was saying, is that in students choosing in the past, when they chose university colleges, it was really difficult for them to articulate to other institutions what that meant. And so I think one of the benefits of these changes is that there's increased mobility between these institutions, and from students that have degrees from these institutions, when they try to apply to graduate school, for example, outside of BC or outside of Canada, that it's easier for them to transfer those degrees directly into other programs, because it's easier for other institutions to understand what those degrees mean outside of the BC context. I think, second of all, one of the benefits is that there's going to be a broader definition of research and scholarship. A lot of these new universities are going to be applying for funding, direct funding from the federal and provincial government to fund research. That's part of their mandate as universities. And I think that that's going to have some direct impact on students and funding for the future of all institutions.
Well, this gets right to the central message of a registrar's role, this transferability, Kate. Do you,
Right.
Is there an increase now in the transferability among all our institutions? Is this a growing phenomenon here?
Well, I think that BC definitely has it's considered to have one of the best transfer systems in Canada and probably North America. And it would be sad to see that we lose that. And if anything, I'm hoping that what we'll see as a result of this is that there will be greater collaboration, because the fact of the matter is that there isn't enough funding for everybody to do everything. And so we need to really stress what we do well, and we need to find partners that want to do that with us, and ensure that we're providing all kinds of means for students to transfer no matter where they start.
Well, I'm going to come back to the funding question as it relates overall to post-secondary, but before we go there, you haven't said too much about cost of attending or the status of the various institutions, and those are factors too that parents and students will be weighing as they decide which institution to go to. So could you comment, Michelle, first a little bit on the relative cost of these institutions and the question of status? You know, people associate reputation and status with valuing of post-secondary education. How much of a factor should these considerations be?
Well, I think you hit on something very key right there. That's the difference between cost and value. And the value of higher education is of course, very important. And that hasn't changed. In fact, the returns to a degree for post-secondary education have increased for students that have higher degrees. Kate and I were talking about this earlier. It's the value has maintained or increased, even though the cost may have gone up, in some cases more than inflation, but at the same time there's been decreases in funding directly from the provincial government to the institutions. So students are sharing more of a burden of that cost, and I think what we're going to see is institutions seeking more external funding, and that seeking alternative mechanisms for funding their programs and institutions and that sort of thing, which I think, going back to what Kate was talking about earlier, is really going to be important, that we have these collaborations that are institutional collaborations rather than how we have them now, which is predominantly individuals collaborating on individual research projects. I think in the future what we'll see more of is institutional collaboration across programs and different areas, which I think is really important.
Is there much difference in the out-of-pocket cost to a student between a college, such as you worked at prior, and a university such as SFU?
Tuition tends to be a little bit lower, and it depends on the particular program. So what would happen typically at a college where you have a variety of different kinds of programs, some that might actually have a higher cost, let's say practical nursing, which actually is a very lab-intensive kind of program, it would have a higher tuition cost at a college, which would be probably more equivalent to what a undergrad arts or science student would have at university. So, but if they're doing their university transfer, it's actually at a lower cost. I too really think that the important message for parents is around value, the value of education, and that the fact is that we forget about that when we're talking about the cost, because the cost is immediate, and that the returns on that value actually play out over a lifetime. The other thing is that I think parents really need to understand is that inherent in the policy that the government has at both the federal and the provincial level around student aid is that there's an expectation that parents will contribute to their children's education. And so there is this expectation out there, and parents really need to know how to access things like the Canada Savings Grant so that they're actually tapping into some of the resources at a very early age for their children and to save for their education. Plus, universities in particular have done a tremendous job at supporting students in a whole variety of ways. Students from a merit point of view and students from a needs point of view. And that's something I think that we'll see more emphasis put on.
I'm wondering if the increase in the number of universities is going to promote some kind of competition among universities, different from what we've experienced in the past. Have you thought at all about this, Michelle?
Quite a bit. Quite a bit. And actually I've been in some conversations with people at other institutions to see what their take has been on it. And I think on one hand, there is a lot of competition in our future, I think. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of opportunity for collaboration, like I was saying, across institutions and across programs, whereas previously most of those collaborations have taken place on an individual level. I think that I'm looking at the positive, and that we can certainly benefit from some competition. It'll, like Kate was talking about, how it will force us in some ways to differentiate ourselves and to figure out what our niche is and what we're very good at, and it'll push institutions to figure those things out and to figure what their core mission is, and to figure out what they really do well, and to move forward with those things, and to, in some ways increase efficiencies. But I think because we don't have a system of higher education in BC, I think in some ways that makes it very difficult for us to coordinate our efforts, because we're at cross purposes at institutions as we lobby legislators for funds or for programs and that sort of thing. So it can work both ways.
Okay. Kate, you have a lot of responsibility in the area of admissions as well as financial aid, and this competition also enters in the realm of admissions, both between institutions and within an institution. Would you explain a little bit how it's competitive to get the major you want and get the institution you want, and what that competition is based on?
Well, I think that definitely I think it's competitive now in terms of going after the brightest, best and brightest students, that it's a competitive market now. And I think that part of what we have to do is really show students why they're a good fit for our institution, for the institution that they're most interested in. And that plays out in a whole number of things. It has to do with the quality of our academic programs. It has to do with the plus factors that we have. So at SFU, we have very, very strong cooperative education program. We have very, very strong international programs. And those are kind of features that parents are looking and students are looking, prospective students are looking for, is for that added value that can come from your undergraduate education. And that's really, I think, what's going to distinguish people in the marketplace, if we want to get kind of crass about it. But the thing is that each institution is going to have to differentiate who they are, what they provide, and we're also going to have to collaborate. And we're seeing some of that now, which I think is a really positive thing.
More from Michelle and Kate when we come back.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
We're talking about the cost of and admission to higher education today with Michelle Nilsson and Kate Ross from SFU. Michelle, I want to go back to this idea of status or prestige. I think families involve this a good deal in their choice of post-secondary institutions, and I want to dig down a little bit more so their information is better on this subject.
Okay. Well, it became clear 2 years ago with the call for increasing the number of graduate seats across the province that there was a move towards increasing capacity at the graduate research level in particular. So especially with regards to the 5 existing institutions in the Lower Mainland, that they were going to be moving a lot of the prestige followed the graduate student seats, in my opinion. And I think that as we build research capacity, you'll see at least with regards to looking at research as one measure of prestige, that the institutions that are receiving more funding with regards to graduate student is one area that parents might want to look at if they're interested in having their undergraduate participate at an undergraduate level in research projects. Mm-hmm. The liberal arts areas, there are different measures for obvious reasons.
Okay. Kate, what do you say to a parent who says, you know, I think my child would be better off at a more instructionally intensive place, but we would like to see him wear the credentials of one of our flagship universities? How do you help them through that analysis?
Well, it's interesting because when you brought up the word prestige or status, I thought of a study that I've recently read that compared the American system and the Canadian system and looked at how students made decisions. Because the prestige hierarchy is very alive in the American system, and it's actually emerging in Canada. And Canadian students actually tend to make their decision based on program and then institution. Well, it's the other way around in the States. And yet, I do believe from my conversations with parents is that it's still really important to them where their child goes, in terms of that there's a signal about your potential that exists depending on where you go. And that's something that parents need to think about in terms of where their young person is thinking about going in the long term. And will it open up the doors that need to be open in terms of where they want to take their career?
Let me put it another way.
Okay.
The shorthand way would be to say, can you get anywhere from anywhere else? In other words, could I start at Northern Lights College, which I was up visiting recently, and can I end up being the leader of the province or leader in business or industry, get an MBA?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's important, isn't it?
That's the beauty of the system in BC. And I think that that's something we don't want to lose, is the fact that students should be able to start where they're at and be able to then to have the opportunity to go as far as they want to go at the institution that they want to attend.
And Michelle, do you agree with this, that when we say this, it's not just feel-good talk, but this is really true?
Yes, and I think that's one of the benefits of the 5 new institutions becoming universities, is that students no longer have to leave their homes necessarily in order to go to a university. They can stay in Abbotsford, for example, or they can stay where they're at. If they're near Capilano, they can stay up there and go to a university and get a university education and still expect to achieve and to have the same life goals, outcomes that they would have if they had gone to UBC or SFU.
All right, so let me dig again and say, I'll be the parent saying, what's really going to be different in the day-to-day life of my child as a student when they go from one institution to another? Well, how does it really feel differently, and therefore what should I look for in their learning style so that I counsel them to go to the right sort of university or college?
Well, definitely that they're going to experience at a smaller institution, you will experience smaller classes. And if that's something that's really important in terms of the learning style and being in a where maybe your student needs that kind of confidence building, the academic confidence building from moving from a high school to post-secondary. And for some families, it's also about being closer, like Michelle says, about actually, going to the local institution that's in your community, and then making that transition to a higher level institution that has more opportunity. The difference will be about those added value pieces that I talked about, that a larger institution will have more international partnerships. They'll have connections to different employers, more national employers, more international employers. So I think it's really dependent on what that particular student is looking for in terms of their career path and what opportunity they want for themselves in the future.
And of course, as you said, you can mix and match.
Absolutely.
You can start out at a 2-year institution and you can end up at any of the other institutions and then move on to graduate school. One of the interesting facts I picked up from our business dean a couple of years ago is that more than half of all of our MBA students did not major in business.
Right.
And of course, that's important information because business is extremely competitive right now in BC as a major to try and get entry to the universities in.
If I could too.
Yes, please.
Just to interject, I think one important thing that we have here in BC too that's really important is we have the Western Dean's Agreement. So even if you are enrolled at one institution, you can still take classes at other institutions and matriculate those into your program. So while you're choosing a program, or specifically based on what your desires are and what your passion is, you can also take classes at other institutions within BC.
Thank you. That is really...
And if they're close proximity,
right,
that allows a student to actually have that opportunity. And now, you know, we have quite a few institutions in a fairly large urban area that students will be able to...
So, as with many things in the marketplace, you can be an informed consumer of higher education. You can get involved, ask questions, do research, talk with people, visit, and make good choices. And some possibilities that may not have occurred to you will emerge if you do your personal research.
Yeah, a really good site for students and parents is called Education Planner. And it's developed by the British Columbia Transfer group that looks, and it's a great site. It has all the different educational opportunities that are available in British Columbia, where they're offered at, what are the admission requirements. Everything's there to help a student.
There's been some controversy around the province this year about provincial exams because the universities have been moving away from including them in the admissions profile of students. Do you have some thoughts on this? What was the value of them and what is lost if we move away from provincial exams as a part of the admissions package?
Well, what we've seen is across the country, when the provincial government went to optional provincial exams, other than for grade 12 English, that Ontario quickly moved to dropping that requirement for our BC students. And it's kind of come west, and now we're the one institution in the province that will still require them, though we are looking at making a different decision than that in the next short while. And provincial exams, I think, have been seen as a measure of standard. And if you look at the data, there is a difference between a course mark and an exam mark. And so what that will mean is that what we will see happen is we will look at calculating our admission averages a little differently. So I think that it won't make a huge difference in terms of admission standards. It will just change the way we actually calculate it.
Michelle, you have much of your experience in the United States where they rely more on SAT scores. Mm-hmm. What do you think as you look at the two systems now, the BC way of admitting persons on based primarily on their high school grade point averages versus the U.S. with a heavy reliance on SATs?
Well, I think each one has its benefits, but ultimately they're both about a test, a snapshot in a point in time. Mm-hmm. And I think there's definitely some problems with that. The use of that as just the one measure of criteria for getting into a post-secondary education. Research throughout history has shown that the one indicator of success, academic success in post-secondary education is high school math level and grades, not a test exam score, but the grades in those classes throughout the 4 or 5 years in Ontario, 4 years of high school, and that's the #1 predictor for success in post-secondary education. Not to say that science and English isn't important also, but that mathematics really plays a role in the success of students in almost every program. So I think that looking at more holistic measures or other measures that take into account more than just one test or one point in time are really going to become important as we look at how we're changing admission criteria for post-secondary education across BC and Canada.
We'll be right back.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Thank you to our guests, Michelle and Kate. Choosing one's path in higher education is one of life's key decisions. Not only does this choice represent a major investment, but it also affects career satisfaction and success. The path from secondary school to a career is more a marathon, however, than a sprint. Families should play out their investment with the whole task in mind, rather than spend too heavily on one stage of the process. It is also worth noting that many grand careers have begun in humble origins. A good match for the student entering higher education is more important than a high-status acceptance. Look past status to the institutional feel, visit campuses, talk with students, and plan for the whole duration of your post-secondary education. It will last a lifetime and has effects that go beyond the economic realm to that of personal development, longevity, and health. For those that have achieved such success, let's be generous and not close the door on rising generations by limiting access or raising tuition prohibitively. Thanks for tuning in to Your Education Matters.
For more information about this show or to view past episodes, go to the Your Education Matters website at www.youreducationmatters.ca. The views and opinions presented in this program are not necessarily those of all faculties, staff, or administration at SFU.